relentless pattering of cold rain against my bedroom window set the tone for everything. I caught myself rubbing my eyes because I could no longer follow the now swaying lines. My book had become nothing but a jumble of letters. I spent another minute trying to decipher the words, but my exhausted mind couldn't make sense of them anymore. I folded down the top right corner of the page and carefully placed Bram Stoker's Dracula back on the windowsill. At some point, I must have nodded off because I began to dream, a dream about eyes. Red eyes, the size of saucers, staring into the depths of my soul. No matter how hard I tried to look away, I couldn't escape their gaze. I felt like I was staring into the abyss itself, into a black hole pulling me into its dark embrace. And this strange dream held me captive for who knows how long. The fear was overwhelming, gripping me tight. I sank into the darkness like quicksand. It was the first rays of light that broke my stillness, as if my body had been frozen, and the warmth of the sun slowly thawed my bones. I sat in my chair for a moment and let the effects of the strange dream sink in. Eventually, my mind returned to some semblance of normality. I glanced outside and saw the sun joyfully dancing in the orange and yellow of the autumn leaves. My heart skipped a little at the sight, and with the indestructibility of youth, I soon forgot the eerie nightmare. With a joyful shout, I rushed down the stairs, 3 steps at a time. Without a care for the world, I threw myself into a blind adventure. At school, we had read Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, and I was pretty convinced there was treasure buried somewhere in my garden. My first attempt, at least, was a 3-meter-deep hole. The buried treasure might not have been found, but I did manage to successfully cut through our sprinkler system. The hole soon filled with water, and my parents ended my excavation attempts after that. At least, I stopped digging in the garden. I was too stubborn to give up on my dreams of pirate treasure entirely and stop digging altogether. I snuck into my dad's shed, stole a flathead shovel, and wandered down the path where I could continue my excavation without my parents' supervision. Searching for telltale signs of pirate interference, I strayed off the path, and that's when I saw it. It was the biggest oak tree I had ever seen, with massive bare branches looming over me like the hands of a twisted god. And for some reason, that dream came rushing back to the forefront of my mind. With the clarity of frightened eyes, I saw a rickety cross held together by old, frayed ropes at the ends. A spark of excitement burned away all my reservations. I quickly scrambled down the hill to the base of the giant oak to get a better look at the sign. Upon closer inspection, I saw a name carved into the base of the cross. It read, Victor P. Alexander. It didn't sound like the name of a pirate, but I thought it was still worth investigating. After all, this place was as good as any other. On that first day, I dug for almost 8 hours through loose earth and life. The hole was bigger and deeper than I had ever managed in the past, but still, I found nothing. No buried treasure, no time capsule.
A spark of excitement burned away all my reservations. I quickly scrambled down the hill to the base of the giant oak to get a better look at the sign. Upon closer inspection, I saw a name carved into the base of the cross. It read, Victor P. Alexandre. It didn't sound like the name of a pirate, but I thought it was still worth investigating. After all, this place was as good as any other. On that first day, I dug for almost 8 hours through loose earth and life. The hole was bigger and deeper than I had ever managed in the past, but still, I found nothing. No buried treasure, no time capsule, nothing that could have interested me. I was on the verge of giving up when my shovel suddenly struck something solid. Indifferently, I tossed the shovel aside and slowly began to sift through the loose dirt with my hands. To my great dismay, my fingers touched a smooth surface. Using water from my bottle, I washed away the dirt and scrubbed it clean with my hands. The surface was white as bone, yet flat. On closer inspection, I realized it had to be smooth marble. My heart began to beat faster. If this wasn't hidden treasure, only God knew what else it could be. The next day, I dug like my life depended on it. The marble slab was larger than I had expected. I had already cleared more than a meter of it. The day grew shorter, and the shadows stretched longer, but I still found myself inspecting the slab. Just before day turned to night, my hand came across a large padlock, one of those old-fashioned cast-iron locks, heavy and rusty, with the metal flaking off. Still, I couldn't break it with ease. I tried to knock it off with the sharp end of the shovel, but it resisted my efforts with ease. Then I heard my mother's voice calling for me. I jumped at the sound and tried to brush the dirt from my arms and legs, though I must have done a poor job because when she saw me, disappointment flickered in her eyes. She gave me a once-over and asked, "Jack Dancer, did you cut through another sprinkler line?" I gave her a sheepish grin. She pointed toward the bathroom and said, "Get cleaned up before your father sees you." I obeyed immediately, not wanting to push my luck any further. The rest of the evening passed without incident. I slept like a baby. But that was the last night I ever slept soundly, unbothered by nightmares or monsters. The first tentative rays of morning light woke me. The excitement of my discovery stole away my ability to sleep in. It was a Saturday morning, with not a cloud in the sky. The wind playfully tugged at my hair and clothes. It was the kind of morning I'd usually spend flying kites. But that day, something else had my full attention. My mind raced at 100 kilometers per hour, fantasizing about all the possibilities. What could lie beneath the marble floor? It had to be something valuable if it was buried so deeply and guarded by such a lock. I thought maybe it was a treasure trove hidden by conquerors, or perhaps a secret entrance to a lost civilization. The possibilities were endless, limited only by my imagination. My plan was simple. If brute force couldn't break the lock, then I'd use the angle grinder from my dad's shed. To my great amusement, I remembered how the grinder had sliced through the heavy lock on my bike when I lost the key a year ago. Luck, or perhaps misfortune, was on my side that day. With a dull thud, I carelessly jumped into the hole. Those red eyes from my dream flared feverishly in my mind. A sudden wave of fear almost made me climb back out the way I had come. But just as quickly as the fear came, it vanished. The curiosity of a 10-year-old was too strong for any reservations I might have had. In moments, I was cutting through the lock. The grinder sliced through the metal like butter, sending orange sparks dancing across the ground. A thunderclap snapped me back to reality. Startled, I almost dropped the still whirring grinder. I looked up and saw thick black clouds rolling toward me. It wasn't supposed to rain, yet the encroaching darkness suggested otherwise, blocking out the bright sunlight. The light around me seemed to fade, as though time itself was fast-forwarding, leaving me stranded in twilight. It was eerie, and a small shiver ran through my entire body. It felt as though the storm had been triggered by the cutting of the lock. Though that was impossible, wasn't it? Still, I couldn't shake the thought. It was absurd, but there had been no storm before, and now there was one. I heard a creaking, cracking sound and felt the slab beneath my feet begin to shift. To my horror, the ground gave way, and I slipped into the darkness. I rolled a few meters and landed flat on my back. Down there, it was almost completely dark, except for a single ray of light shining through the opening left by the marble slab. I couldn't see anything, but I had the eerie sensation that I was being watched, as if the darkness had eyes staring at me from every direction. I couldn't stay down there long. The silence was unbearable. I kept imagining Dracula watching me from the shadows, his heart still and silent for eternity. It didn't need to beat anymore, not when he was already dead. I scrambled up the steep slope as if my life depended on it, and in that moment, it did. I didn't stop running until I was safely back in my room, hiding under my bed. I knew it was silly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped death. The next morning, I resolved to fill in the hole and never look at that marble slab again. Now that I had a plan, my fear began to subside. When my parents finally made it home and started preparing dinner, I had almost forgotten my brush with death. I ate my meatloaf and broccoli and was rewarded with a big bowl of ice cream while I watched SpongeBob on TV. When it was time for bed, I didn't even argue with my parents about staying up longer. That night, I did something I had never done before. I grabbed my mom's hand, pulled her close, and kissed her on the forehead. Then I went to my dad and did the same. I looked them both in the eyes and said, "You're the best parents a kid could ask for. I just want you to know I love you." Tears welled up in Mom's eyes, and even Dad looked like he was on the verge of crying. In the silence that followed, something happened between us. Our relationship matured. I saw them not just as parents responsible for my well-being, but as people, and they recognized me too. I like to think back on that moment and thank God that I had the chance to say everything my childish mind had felt but couldn't put into words before. It was a tender moment, but it was also the last time I ever saw my parents breathe. I fell asleep almost instantly when my head hit the pillow. A deep sleep, dreamless and peaceful, leaving me refreshed and full of excitement for the next day. But it wasn't morning when I woke up. Those nighttime hours have many names. The witching hour, the dead of night, the time when the moon rests and the night is at its darkest, when hope for morning seems faint. It is the hour of nightmares, the time when evil roams free. A soft knock at my window woke me. My body went stiff, paralyzed by fear, as I lay in bed, alert and listening. I told myself it was just a branch tapping on the glass, but I knew better. The window in my room was right above my head. A quick glance would reveal the source of the noise, but I didn't want to be sure. I preferred to lie there, convincing myself it was something ordinary, rather than risk seeing Dracula's glowing red eyes. And somehow, I knew it was him. I was sure that if I looked up, I would see his pale face, glowing as flawlessly as the marble slab that rested above him. As the night dragged on, the scratching noise grew louder until it was almost deafening. In the end, my curiosity got the better of me. It was like an itch my mom always told me not to scratch. The more you think about it, the harder it becomes to ignore. My eyes widened, and I looked up. I could hardly believe what I saw. On the other side of the glass was my old kite, the red and blue one that had blown away a few weeks ago. I thought my fear would subside once I identified the source of the terrifying noise, but I couldn't shake those red eyes from my mind, and the kite only added to my unease, confirming the irrationality of my fears, or worse, lending them credibility. The clock on my nightstand ticked slowly as I watched the digital numbers change. Every minute felt like hours, but gradually the grip of night loosened, giving way to the oncoming day. The darkness faded, leaving dense shadows cast by the rising streaks of orange on the horizon. Even this stronghold of the night couldn't stand against such an overwhelming force, and soon I was left in the bright light of morning. I made a decision as I wrestled with my fear. I would tell my parents about the marble slab and what I'd done. They'd know what to do. Sure, they'd probably tease me for being scared of it, but I didn't care. In fact, I'd welcome their light-hearted jokes at my expense, because that would mean my fears were baseless. Everything would go back to normal, and I'd just be another kid who'd had a silly nightmare. But it all began in my parents' bedroom. I stormed in, hoping to find the comfort I so desperately needed, but comfort was the last thing I found. The room looked perfectly normal, except for one thing: my parents weren't there. I thought maybe they'd gotten up early, so I checked their bathroom, but it was empty too. When I returned to their bedroom, I noticed something strange. The window beside their bed was open, and on the windowsill sat a large drop of blood. My heart sank, and I knew exactly where they'd gone. Dracula hadn't been after me. He wanted my parents. The kite had just been a distraction, a way to lull me into a false sense of security. I had been right to be afraid. If only I'd been scared enough to run straight to their room last night, would things have been different? Yes, I believe so. In my opinion, belief is the only way to fight vampires, and kids have a pretty good knack for believing. He must have known I'd never leave my room, otherwise he could have easily come for me that night. I let my parents down. No, I killed them. I should never have opened that lock. I should have sealed the hatch the moment I saw it. Of course, it had been a grave. The marker above it was a dead giveaway. I was an idiot, a damned fool. What did it say again? Victor P. Alexandra. Not Dracula, but close enough. Surely, whatever killed him before would work again. It took me the rest of the day to gather the materials I needed. I found garlic cloves in the spice cupboard. Since we were a Catholic family, finding a crucifix wasn't hard. The hardest part was fashioning the wooden stakes. In the end, I used the legs from our kitchen table, filing them down to jagged points. Then I grabbed the massive padlock my dad sometimes used on his shed. You could never have too many spares. With everything ready, I followed the trail of my parents' blood back to the hole I had dug. I stared at the marble slab, now stained with my family's blood, and felt frozen in place. I watched in horror as the sun began to set, knowing my chance was slipping through my fingers. One thought gnawed at me. What if my parents were down there? Could I bring myself to look them in the eye as I drove a stake through their hearts? Call it what you will, but a few minutes before the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, something caught my eye, a metallic glint. Upon closer inspection, it was the small silver crucifix necklace my mom always wore. The sight of it spurred me on, as if someone had branded me with a hot iron. It scorched my fear, leaving only a numb sense of responsibility. Without a second thought, I jumped into the hole to retrieve my mom's pendant, flicking on my torch as I went. Time was running out. The sun was setting, and the shadows were growing longer. My heart pounded a steady staccato against my ribs. I was terrified that my heartbeat would wake the creature and give me away, but I couldn't afford to worry about that. So I didn't. With a clarity I'd never felt before, I made my way through the crypt's opening. As I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been swallowed alive by some mythical beast. Like Jonah in the belly of the whale, I suppose. The darkness closed in around me, and the faint glow of my torch barely extended a meter ahead. The walls were lined with urns and vases, and every few meters I passed a niche holding an empty coffin. Panic gripped my limbs, threatening to paralyze me. What if he was behind me, or hiding in one of the alcoves? I was afraid to breathe, terrified of making any sudden noise. The thought of waking him and facing him head-on almost froze me in place, but the sound of my parents' voices urged me on. Their presence gave me the resolve to see this through. I heard my mom's voice in my mind. If I were you, I'd... And my dad's strong, steady voice added, do the right thing, even if it's hard. So I kept going, one step at a time, my footsteps muffled by the oppressive darkness. Before I knew it, I stood before 3 closed coffins. One was larger, positioned in the center, with the others against the side walls. I knew immediately which one held Victor. I headed straight for it, but hesitated. Instead, I opened the coffin on the right. Inside lay my mum. She looked like she was sleeping, peaceful, except for 2 small puncture wounds on the side of her neck. The coffin on the left held my dad. Tears blurred my vision as I realized they had been turned. I stood there, stake in hand, unable to drive it into the heart of the woman who gave me life. I closed their coffins and turned toward the monsters. I was ready to stake him through the heart. A wicked smile spread across my face as I opened the lid, but the grin vanished the moment I saw the empty coffin. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A booming laugh echoed through the corridor behind me. Well, you've surprised me," Victor said with a soft, slightly European accent. "Plenty of fools have tried to kill me, but they were usually drug addicts. You, though, this is a first. I've never encountered a child brave enough to face me in the dark. Maybe it was anger, or maybe my mind couldn't process the fear. Either way, my voice came out steady and strong. That's why I'll succeed where others failed." Victor laughed, wiping tears from his eyes. "May I know the name of the one who will bring about my demise?" the vampire asked, a cruel smile spreading across his pale face. "My name is Jack Dancer, and the people you killed last night were my parents." "Ah, I see. It's anger driving you. Anger may overpower your fear for now, but before I'm done with you, it will return. I'll make you envy the stillborn, and your blood will restore me to full strength." I shot back. "I don't need to be grown up to drive a stake through your cowardly heart. After all, I'm not the one hiding in fear of being defeated." Victor smirked. "I wasn't hiding, fool. I was imprisoned here by enemies far smarter than you. They weren't foolish enough to think they could take me on alone. They sealed the entrance and buried my entire crypt until you, quite by accident, set me free," Victor said with a smirk. I swallowed hard, knowing he was at least partly right. I had released him, and my parents had paid the price for it. This was my burden to bear, my mess to clean up. By God, I was determined to see it through to the end. Without warning, I hurled a whole clove of garlic straight at his face. Victor swatted it aside easily, but as it brushed his skin, a hiss erupted. The garlic left a nasty burn on his flesh. For a moment, I allowed myself a flicker of triumph, but before I could react, Victor lunged at me, striking me with the back of his hand and sending me flying into the coffin where my mother lay. Pain exploded through my ribs with a sharp crack. The impact stole my breath, and I cried out, clutching my side. Victor seemed to relish my agony, prowling toward me slowly, savoring every moment. My backpack, filled with supplies, was slung over his left shoulder. The stake I had been holding slipped from my grip when he hit me, leaving me defenseless. Victor knew it too. I saw it in the smug grin stretched across his face. It was over. My parents were dead because of me, and I couldn't even avenge them. I had failed them, and now this creature would tear me apart, piece by piece, enjoying every second. But then I heard my mom's voice in my mind, clear as day. "I gave you my necklace. Kill the bastard." My hand instinctively went to my neck, feeling the cool touch of the silver crucifix. With a swift motion, I yanked the chain free and wrapped it around my hand. Timing was everything. I'd only get one shot. I had to make it count. The element of surprise was on my side, but Victor was still terrifyingly fast. I'd have to let him get close, painfully close, before I struck. I gave him exactly what he wanted. I begged for my life. "Please," I whimpered. "I didn't mean it. Have mercy on me. I'll serve you, I swear. I'll do whatever you want. I set you free, didn't I?" Victor's grin widened, revealing sharp, gleaming fangs. I trembled. It wasn't hard to act the part. I was truly terrified, and he seemed to enjoy it. He placed his elegant hands on my shoulders, holding me the way a father might hold his son. "You've been very helpful," he whispered, "and I can think of one more way for you to be useful to me." He leaned in as if to kiss me, but at the last moment, his head reared back like a snake preparing to strike. I was ready. With a fluid motion, I shoved the crucifix deep into his throat. His sharp fangs shredded my fingers, but the moment the silver touched his flesh, a blue flame ignited within him. I watched in awe as his head began to melt and dissolve. Within seconds, his entire body crumbled into ash. The only thing left was my mother's crucifix, resting atop the pile of ashes. I picked it up and tucked it into my pocket, letting out a long, shaky breath. Then I turned to the other two coffins. Tears blurred my vision. How could I possibly do it? How could I drive stakes through the hearts of the people who had raised me, loved me? I opened my mom's coffin again. She looked so peaceful, as if she were merely asleep. She appeared more beautiful than she had in years, her wrinkles smoothed away, her face serene. Something caught my eye, the ruined remains of my backpack, and beside it, the heavy padlock I had taken from my dad's shed. An idea struck me. Maybe I didn't have to kill them. Maybe I could lock them away, bury them again. The night was almost upon me, and I had to make a decision fast. In a moment of weakness, I made my choice. It was well past midnight by the time I shoveled the last of the loose dirt back into the hole. Not long after I started, I heard scratching from inside the grave. But I didn't pause, not even for a water break. By the time the hole was half filled, I could no longer hear my parents' screams. Although sometimes, I still hear them in my dreams. The moon was hidden behind thick rain clouds, making it hard to see. I'd lost my torch in my frantic escape from the crypt, but that didn't matter. I made my way back home slowly but without fear, because I was no longer afraid of the shadows of the night.